Herzlich willkommen heute am Samstagnachmittag zur diesjährigen, ich weiß nicht, vielleicht neuen Institution der Closing Lecture oder neuen Tradition, die eröffnet wird. Das müssen Günter Mey und Katja Mruck entscheiden und diskutieren. Mein Name ist Reiner Keller. Ich freue mich, diesen Vortrag und die Diskussion moderieren zu können. Ich hoffe, Sie haben noch ein bisschen Brain-Kapazität in diesem frischen Saal hier, um dem Vortrag zu folgen. Der Vortrag selber wird in Englisch sein. Ich gebe am Anfang eine kurze Einführung. Wir haben dann etwa 35 bis 40 Minuten Vortrag von Adele Clarke und im Anschluss daran Gelegenheit zur Diskussion. Günter Mey wird gegen Ende dann noch ein kurzes Schlusswort sprechen. Mit dieser Closing Lecture gibt es eigentlich eine schöne Klammer aus meiner Sicht für die Veranstaltung, für das Berliner Methodentreffen in diesem Jahr, denn Reiner hatte ja in seiner Eröffnungsrede im Grunde die Tradition des Pragmatismus sehr deutlich hervorgehoben, und diese Tradition wird hier am Ende sicherlich auch eine Rolle spielen in dem Vortrag von Frau Clarke, denn sie kommt aus der Tradition der Grounded Theory, des symbolischen Interaktionismus, und verbindet das mit Perspektiven, die hier im deutschsprachigen Raum eher als Postmodernismus oder Poststrukturalismus verbunden werden oder assoziiert werden. Ich selber möchte Ihnen vielleicht am Anfang kurz sagen, wie ich dazu gekommen bin, wie wir uns kennengelernt haben. Und ich habe vor einigen Jahren, vor 4 Jahren etwa, glaube ich, in Google gesurft oder über Google nach 2 Begriffen oder nach einer Begriffsverbindung gesucht, nämlich Symbolic Interactionism und Foucault. Diese Kombination ist im deutschsprachigen Raum nicht sehr häufig in den letzten Jahrzehnten gewesen. Sie nimmt etwas zu und sie entspricht so meinen eigenen Interessen auch, an denen ich arbeite. Und ich habe 3 Referenzen gefunden weltweit, könnte man sagen, auf Google. Das eine war ein Artikel, der mir schon bekannt war, über symbolischen Interaktionismus und den Machtbegriff Foucaults. Das zweite war ein Artikel oder ein Hinweis auf 2 britische Soziologinnen, Sue Scott und Stevie Jackson, die aus feministischer Perspektive über das Doing Orgasm geschrieben haben. Das hatte mich auch interessiert und das habe ich inzwischen übersetzen lassen können, einen kleinen Artikel in einem Buch, Körperwissen, wenn Sie das interessiert. Und die dritte Referenz, die ich gefunden habe, war das Buch Situational Analysis von Adele Clarke, was gewissermaßen den Hintergrund oder die Grundlage für diesen Vortrag heute bilden wird. Ich möchte gar nicht viel zu dem Buch und seiner Konzeption sagen. Ich möchte Ihnen vielleicht ankündigen, Sie haben die Plakate draußen schon gesehen, dieses Buch wird Anfang des Jahres, so hoffe ich im Frühjahr, bei VS erscheinen als deutsche Ausgabe, und in dem aktuellen Grounded Reader, der draußen verfügbar ist, haben Sie so ein paar erste Auszüge und Hinweise auf dieses Buch und die Diskussion. Adele Clarke ist gewisserweise eine Vertreterin der 2. Generation der Grounded Theory, wie das genannt wird. Ich möchte Ihnen ein paar Stichworte zu ihrer Biografie, zu ihrer intellektuellen Biografie mit in die Vorlesung, in den Vortrag hineingeben. Sie arbeitet vorwiegend im Feld der Wissenschafts- und Technikforschung und steht da für eine symbolisch-interaktionistische Perspektive in den Social Studies of Science seit langem. Sie hat im Jahr 2000 den Ludwig Fleck Award der Society for Social Studies of Science erhalten für ihr Buch mit dem Titel Disciplining Reproduction, ein Buch über die Entwicklung im Grunde der Reproduktionswissenschaften in den USA in den Jahren etwa von 1910 bis 1960. Das ist eine Studie in historischer Wissenschaftssoziologie und Wissenschaftsforschung, wenn Sie so wollen. Sie hat für ihr Buch Situational Analysis mehrere Awards bekommen, unter anderem den Cooley Award der Society for the Study of Symbolic Interaction. Damit ist dieses Buch, das 2005 erschienen ist in den USA, ausgezeichnet worden. Und es gibt noch mehrere Preise, das will ich hier jetzt nicht alles aufzählen. Adele Clarke, hatte ich gesagt, gehört zur 2. Generation der Grounded Theory. Sie hat studiert in New York Soziologie, Medizinsoziologie und hat ihren Master gemacht, muss die Daten aufrufen, ihren Master gemacht 1970 an der New York University bei Elliot Frighton, eine Medizinsoziologin. Sie hat dann an verschiedenen Universitäten als Lecturer gearbeitet und ist 1985 sie ist dann gegangen an die University of California in San Francisco zu Anselm Strauss und hat dort ihren PhD gemacht. Und wenn Sie das erste Methodenbuch von Strauss, das übersetzt worden ist ins Deutsche, also ich meine jetzt nicht die Discovery of Grounded Theory, sondern die, ich glaube, Grundlagen qualitativer Sozialforschung hieß es, da sind einige Arbeitsprotokolle enthalten aus Diskussionen und Interpretationssitzungen, die bei Studierenden oder von Studierenden dort durchgeführt worden sind, unter Anleitung von Strauss. Und Frau Clarke ist sozusagen eine der pseudonymisierten Teilnehmerinnen dieser Diskussion gewesen. Sie hat 1985 ihren PhD gemacht und ist dann gegangen an die Stanford University, hat dort Lehrtätigkeiten ausgeübt und 1989 ist sie zurückberufen worden an die University of California, San Francisco und hat die Nachfolge von Anselm Strauss übernommen und lehrt seitdem an dieser Universität. Ihre Arbeitsgebiete sind hauptsächlich Medizinsoziologie, Frauengesundheitsforschung und die Weiterentwicklung von qualitativen Methoden und Methodologien. Und das ist das, was sozusagen das Buch Situational Analysis ausmacht. Sie ist Herausgeberin eines Journals für Biomedicalization, das ist sozusagen der breitere Kontext, in dem diese Arbeiten auch verortet sind. Ja, so viel vielleicht zur Einführung. Ich möchte damit an Frau Clarke übergeben. Wir werden danach Gelegenheit haben, etwas zu diskutieren, so hoffe ich. Die zweite Generation der Grounded Theory, das könnte ich noch erwähnen, das ist sozusagen ein Aufbruch, der in den letzten Jahren, im letzten Jahrzehnt stattgefunden hat, sich von in gewisser Weise die alten Traditionen der Grounded Theory weiterzuführen und mit neuen Überlegungen zu verbinden und sie auch etwas anders zu akzentuieren. Bitte sehr, Frau Clarke.
Thank you so much for coming after a long, exciting conference, and thank you also for listening in English. Oh, I am truly delighted to be here. I especially thank Reiner Keller, who emailed me out of the blue about translating situational analysis into German about 2 years ago. And hundreds of emails later, here I am. I thank also Ulrike Froschauer at the University of Vienna and Beata Littig and Angela Robluski from the IHS in Vienna and Günter Mey and Katja Muck for inviting me here. It's been a most exciting visit, and I have learned much about the very different history of qualitative methods in Germany and Austria, and I will try to situate my work a little bit in terms of that. My slides are very wordy. I know most of you are listening in a second language, and I hope this helps. I will also try to speak slowly, but I'm originally from New York, and that is very hard because we talk quickly. As I prepared this paper, I remembered Anselm Strauss's comment that symbolic interactionism is a banquet. People come and take what they want and leave the rest and go on. So too are grounded theory and situational analysis. My focus today is on the philosophical and sociological roots and assumptions of situational analysis. I very briefly present the method, but this is not a how-to presentation, but more perhaps why-to, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. So I'll start with a bit of intellectual autobiography. The roots of situational analysis go deep. After having become skilled in American survey research at NYU and other experiences, I finally felt I had come home intellectually when I entered UC San Francisco's doctoral program in sociology as a student in 1980. We immediately pursued hands-on, do-it-yourself qualitative research projects, and human subjects approval was required even in 1980. We immediately, and we had courses with superb faculty. Ginny Olison and Lenny Schatzman taught field research, and Anselm Strauss followed with grounded theory analysis organized as small working groups that we could take for as long as we wanted, and we wanted. So, and our main text was the classic book from the first generation of grounded theorists, Anselm and Barney Glaser. My cohort also met with Barney Glaser for analysis groups, probably the last to do so, as by 1980 he was no longer on the faculty at UCSF. But he still came to the parties, so here on the left is Barney, and on the right is Anselm at one of our department parties. I think it's about 1985. On sabbatical until January, maybe I'll have time to check the dates. Both subsequently published their own books on grounded theory. Here are Barney's two books, and the second is in reaction to a Strauss and Corbin book of 1990. And here are the Strauss books and the Strauss and Corbin. And the bottom one is a reader of. Others have since joined the grounded theory gang, and I'm going to do a little genealogy of grounded theory next, and I hope you can read it. It shows the founding text at the top, in the middle, and Barney Glaser's lineage on the right, down to the present. Lenny Schatzman's variation of dimensional analysis off on the left, and flowing from Strauss down the middle are the core members of the second generation of grounded theorists, Kathy Charmaz, Julie Corbin, and myself. And each of us has also done a text more recently. Here is a picture, and that's me in the middle from that same party, and Kathy Charmaz on the right. So, and Kathy is one of the co-editors of the Handbook of Grounded Theory, which is a terrific resource about the method. And then a group of us published together Developing Grounded Theory, the second generation, a couple of years ago, based on a conference. In that book, with Jan Morse as the lead author, the debates between Glaser and Strauss and Corbin are extensively discussed, and I'm happy to discuss those based on questions at the end, but I don't say much. We ended up asserting at the end of that book that today there are several different kinds of grounded theory. And these are the framings of Norm Denzin's article in the Handbook of Grounded Theory, that Glaserian is objectivist, Strauss and Corbin systematic, Charmaz constructivist, and mine emphasizes situationist. And I think these terms work nicely. So, all right. Let me turn now to the strands of grounded theory which have engaged constructionism and postmodernism, and that those are developed jointly or independently by Kathy Charmaz and myself, although we have a joint project that I'll tell you about at the end. So both of us trained with Strauss and less so Glaser. We were both steeped in Chicago school symbolic interactionism through Anselm, and not in Columbia structural functionalism, which was Barney's tradition. He had done a dissertation in Mertonian sociology of science at Columbia. Both of us were steeped in American pragmatist philosophy, Mead, Dewey, Peirce, and both of us interpret grounded theory through an historically constructionist interactionism, which I discuss a bunch in my book. there were two key constructionist texts for us in the U.S. tradition of interactionism. One is known as the Thomas's theorem, a situation from 1923, a situation defined as real is real in its consequences. And the second is the translation into English of Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman's The Social Construction of Reality, a treatise in the sociology of knowledge, which I read as I began graduate school in the late 1960s, and I still teach every time I teach theory, so very much with us today. And the sociology of knowledge was the focus of my qualifying exam, so it was an interesting, sustained engagement. Okay. During the 80s and 90s, Kathy and I both moved from older positivist inflected understandings of grounded theory to more constructivist epistemologies, which now undergird her version of grounded theory and my situational analysis. On this slide are some of the key differences between the two. There are many versions of postmodern approaches, but these are the elements most important to us. And I'm not going to read them out, I'll let you look at them. Over the past decade or so, I've created what I think of as an extension of grounded theory. I want to be very clear how I retain much of grounded theory and add new forms of analysis. I also urge the inclusion of additional kinds of data not traditionally included, such as narrative, historical, and visual discourse materials, multimedia, documents, etc. Specifically, I assume researchers using situational analysis will also use grounded theory coding, memoing, theoretical sampling strategies, and Straussian analytic diagramming of action of basic social processes in the situation. So my approach in terms is not either or, grounded theory or situational analysis, but both. And at the end of doing all the different modes of empirically grounded analysis, the researcher must decide which analyses to write up and publish, which are most interesting. And as Anselm said, study the unstudied. I too encourage that strongly. So over the past decade or so, Kathy and I began pursuing different goals. Her excellent book on how to do grounded theory research, which I use all the time, and she works a lot with groups on writing projects as well. And I moved on to situational analysis. So what is new in situational analysis? I moved from what new possibilities does it bring to the grounded theory banquet table on offer to all? And I'll discuss 4 facets here today. First, during grad school, I fell in love not only with Anselm Strauss's grounded theory, but also with his social worlds arenas theory, which he had worked on individually and collaboratively at about the same time during the heart of his career. He didn't draw them together, and I did. Social worlds were grasped as universes of discourse, bounded by how far they reached in terms of space, time, and meaning-making. At the same time, discourse as an analytic concept was just hitting the U.S. through the work of Foucault, and I was thrilled. I remembered yearning for such a concept in the mid-1960s, knowing that the new media studies were not enough. So drawing deeply, but not only, on Strauss, situational analysis extends and goes beyond grounded theory. Early Chicago school sociology focused on communities, distinctive locales, and signal events, such as studies of the stockyards, which were giant abattoirs for the cattle from the West and Midwest, taxi dance halls, or what we would today think of as clubs. They studied ethnic neighborhoods, elite neighborhoods, such as a book called The Gold Coast and the Slum. The sociological task was to make the group the focal center and to build up from its discoveries in concrete situations a knowledge of the whole. Data were not integrated around a collective whole like a common culture, which the anthropologists down the hall, led by Robert Redfield, were very much engaged with, but rather in terms of territory or geographic space, which was often mapped. And here we have Robert Park's aerial field model, a conventional model used by them, often done from above, such as city maps, where sites and collectivities were to be explicitly viewed in relation to one another within the larger situation. The power of the ecological model lies in the ability to focus now on the niche and now on the ecosystem. And that movement back and forth is very, the ecosystem which defined it, and that movement is very central to my concerns. And Lee Starr called this the figure ground gestalt switch, analytically fundamental. And in today's vernacular, methodological vernacular, many such studies would be termed multi-sided. In situational analysis, the root metaphor switches from social process and action to social ecology and situation. This is Strauss's map of social worlds and their arenas, and I'll talk a bit more about this later. And his conceptualization of social worlds as collectivities organized into arenas of shared concern and commitment to action is very central. And it grounds the situation of inquiry of the research project. The concept of situation mattered tremendously to me. And these are my 4 key sources of serious inspiration. The Thomas theorem that I discussed earlier, C. Wright Mill's discussion of situated actions, a short section by Norm Denzin in his Research Act text, which argues for carefully situating interpretation, which I would teach again and again, and I knew it wasn't adequate and I needed to go further. And the very famous paper by Donna Haraway titled Situated Knowledges, The Science Question in Feminism, which argues that knowledges are perspectival and is thus a site where median symbolic interactionism and postmodernism overlap. About 20 years ago, Norm Denzin wrote, "Interactionism, if it is to thrive and grow, must incorporate elements of post-structural and postmodern theory, such as the works of Barthes, Derrida, Foucault, Baudrillard, into its underlying views of history, culture, and politics." And he wrote this in 1992. And I agreed. Foucault's work on discourse and the importance of moving beyond the knowing subject both deeply inform situational analysis. Foucault has been called a postmodern version of middle-range theory. He challenged the social sciences by decentering the knowing subject, the individual human as agentic social actor, to focus instead on the social as constituted through discursive practices and on discourses as constitutive of subjectivities. Conceptually, discourses are analytic models of ordering the chaos of the world. So situational analysis goes beyond the knowing subject to also analyze salient discourses dwelling within the situation of inquiry, your empirical area of research. We are all, like it or not, constantly awash in seas of discourses that are constitutive of life itself. So situational analysis enrolls Foucault's post-structural approaches to help push grounded theory around the postmodern turn. Another new aspect of situational analysis is explicitly taking the non-human into analytic account. In the postmodern moment studying action, the analytic center of grounded theory is not enough. As the human subject is decentered, humans are not enough. Fresh methodological attention needs to be paid to non-human objects in situations, things of all kinds, cultural objects, technologies, animals, media, non-human, animate and inanimate pieces of material culture, and the lively discourses that constitutes the situations, from cups and saucers to lab animals and TV programs. Some are products of human action, and we can study the production processes. Others are construed as natural, and we can study how they have been constructed as such. Many of us who use grounded theory have taken the non-human into account in our research for decades, and this had an important place also in the history of interactionism. And in my book, there's a long quote from Bloomer on precisely this. But we did so without the methodological reflexivity that would make these innovations explicit. Actor network theory developed by Latour, Calon, Law, Acriche initiated a much more explicit theoretical status for the non-human. So I've used their term, the non-human, for that reason. So in sum then, the taproots of situational analysis lie in Chicago school ethnographies, interactionism, and pragmatist philosophy. The new roots include going beyond the knowing subject, a la Foucault, analyzing discourses, and taking the non-human explicitly into account. And these come together in the shift to situations per se as focal, as the unit of analysis, the units of analysis to which I next turn. And I come to the situation through a critique of the conditional matrices which Strauss and Corbin offered in the Basics books and in other sites. In his later work, Strauss was relentlessly sociological in seeking to incorporate and integrate analyses of structural process in new ways. The term structural process was used in the discovery of grounded theory, and I quote, "A major implication of our book is that structure and process are related more complexly and more interestingly than is commonly conceived." Grounded theory aimed at what today might be called deconstructing this age-old binary. But I did not think it pushed hard enough in these directions. And Strauss sought to specify the structural conditions through the methodological framework of the conditional matrix he developed with Julie Corbin. He sought to develop ways to do grounded theory analysis that specified these conditions, literally making them visible in the analysis. So his interactionist sociology was already rooted in process, the classic grounded theory, basic social processes, understanding action as situated activity. And this is the Strauss and Corbin conditional matrix from 1990. Note that action is in the center of the diagram, the basic social process formulation of grounded theory. And it was this book that triggered the controversy with Glaser that followed. Okay, so this is the next version of the conditional matrix, published in the second edition in 1998. We can see that the concentric circles represent the more structural conditions within which the focus of analysis dwells. The structural conditions are portrayed as context, arrayed around the central focus from local to global. Various concerns are organized into levels, international, national, etc. In this version, which Corbin revised after Anselm's death, the individual replaces action as the central analytic, which I don't agree with. But this is a much more lively version, and there's a sense of movement. The arrows go more than one way. But to me, the conditional matrices do not do the conceptual analytic work Strauss wanted done in terms of grounded theory method. And this is my alternative, the situational matrix. Here, the conditions of the situation are in the situation. There is no such thing as context. The conditional elements of the situation need to be specified, and the analysis of the situation itself, as they are constitutive of it, not merely surrounding it or framing it or contributing to it. They are it. Regardless of whether some actors might construe them as local or global, internal or external, close in or far away, or whatever, the fundamental question is, how do these conditions appear and make themselves felt as consequential, as integral parts of the empirical situation under examination? So this conditional matrix, like those of Strauss and Corbin, is an abstract version. The key point that I want to say again is that in situational analysis, the situation is the fundamental unit of analysis. So there we go. The situation of inquiry is then to be empirically constructed through the making of three kinds of maps and following through with analytic work and memos of various kinds. And the memoing process is very intense, as in traditional and constructionist forms of grounded theory. So there are these three kinds of maps. Situational maps lay out the major human, non-human, discursive, and other elements in the research situation of inquiry and provoke analysis of relations among them. And I'll show examples of each. Social worlds arenas maps lay out the collective actors and the arenas of commitment and discourse within which they are engaged in ongoing negotiations, meso-level interpretations of the situation, and harking back to Strauss's social worlds and arenas. Last, positional maps have a different data set. They lay out the major positions taken and not taken in the discursive materials in the situation, vis-a-vis particular axes of difference, concern, and controversy around issues in the situation of inquiry. All three maps are intended as analytic exercises, fresh ways into social science data, well suited to contemporary studies from solely interview-based to multi-sited research projects. Again, they are intended to supplement traditional grounded theory analyses that center on action. And, Today, I can only briefly introduce these maps. The initial maps done, situational maps, again, lay out the major human, non-human, discursive, historical, symbolic, cultural, political, and any other elements you think are in the research situation of concern and provoke analyses of relations among them. These maps are intended to capture the very messy complexities of situations in their dense relations and permutations, and they intentionally work against the usual simplifications so characteristic of scientific work, in particularly postmodern ways. The map as a whole is the situation of inquiry, and many kinds or genres of people and things can be in the situation. The labels you see here are generic, and I think reflect the range of some of the range of possibilities. And again, the fundamental assumptions are that everything in the situation both constitutes and affects most everything else in the situation in some ways. Everything actually in the situation, or understood to be so, conditions the possibilities of interpretation and action. And adequate analyses of situations being researched must include the non-human explicitly and in detail. I actually conceptualized this kind of map based in teaching originally, and I've been teaching qualitative research to doctoral students for about 20-something years, and working in small groups. We worked together for about 6 months, and in small groups each week, and I would have a piece of paper for different students and have notes on it to remember what they had done, a good diagram, what we might want to come back to. And as I sat by myself in a small rented house in the middle of nowhere in eastern Canada, looking out over the St. Lawrence River, trying to figure out what I meant by situational analysis, I remembered these pieces of paper with notes and diagrams, and they became inspirational. And I realized that it wasn't only me who needed remembering, and that all these little things on the pieces of paper were part of what we were trying to understand and analyze. So these hold all kinds of things together. So this is the messy version. This is the neat version. I'm sorry, in the center it says collective human actors, and that should be over on the left-hand side under discursive constructions of individual and/or collective human actors. Here you can see the categories a bit more clearly. They derive in part from my own work, and especially from Strauss's general orders from his 1993 book, within his negotiated processual ordering framework: spatial, temporal, technological, work, sentimental, moral, aesthetic, and so on. In terms of laying out the major elements in situations, these categories seem basic, but it's very important for me to note that there is no need and no expectation that all these categories would appear in any particular research study. What is in the situation is an empirical question, and these maps would be maps of the empirical materials that you have. So, messy is good. So the messy maps that mine, because it's typed here, it looks very neat. But if you do it by hand, which I encourage because it allows you to work with it more frequently without tinkering with technology, instead thinking about what's there more. So I think messy is good and important. And for several reasons. First and foremost, I think it works very strongly against premature closure and analytic closure, especially for new researchers. Premature closure occurs thanks to our anxieties. It also, messy allows easier relational analyses, and I'll come to that soon. Encourages more serious consideration of complexity, and encourages new addition, making recognition of complexity easier. I encourage the situational maps to be done and redone across the career of a research project. And I also want to emphasize something I did not fully realize until I had finished the book, that these maps can be used for research as a research design tool, because it allows you to specify the major elements in the research situation, which we know in advance from all the literature we have read and reviewed. It may help direct data gathering. Going back to the first point, Glaser and Strauss argued in the Discovery book that we should enter a research project as tabula rasa, as clean slates or uninscribed stones. And today that is impossible. And we can't leave the contents of our brains at the door when we start a project. So we have lots of resources and lots of knowledge of the situations we're going to study in advance. And we can use that for project design and then revise our maps based on the empirical materials that we research. Such maps can help direct data gathering. They can help organize your thinking in terms of justifying grant proposals. and assure that you collect data on something and see if it's interesting. They're flexible, and again, to be constructed and reconstructed over time. They also allow exploration without prior commitment. So you can say, I think I should look at this, take a peek, generate some data. If it's not interesting, go on with something else. And it allows keeping track of different elements just in case you want to come back to them, just in case you need to be reminded. The second kind of map one does is a social worlds arenas map, directly inspired by Anselm Strauss. And it assumes multiple collective actors or social worlds, the yellowish entities on that map, in all kinds of negotiations in broad and often contentious substantive arenas. And there are 3 blue arenas, and you can see the worlds both partially in, wholly in the arenas, etc. The focus in these maps is on meso-level organizational, institutional elements of the situation. All the social worlds involved should be represented. The dotted lines indicate porous boundaries. And arenas are focused on matters about which all the involved social worlds care enough to be committed to act and to produce discourses about arena concerns. Thus, arenas are sites of action and discourse, and each social world in an arena typically produces discourses, not only about itself and the other worlds in the arena, but also the other worlds in the arena it attends to. So arenas are often discursive sites in complicated ways. Today, before I go on, many social worlds, organizations, institutions, doing this kind of research is facilitated by websites, because those are the discourses produced by the organizations that create them. Very available, very easy, at least to do the initial examination. And I'm going to show you a very complicated map here, and this is the broad U.S. environmental health arena. This is done by a student of mine who is studying she was studying the emergence of the environmental health sciences as new sciences occurring in its own little new institute at the National Institutes of Health, in academic research centers, a little bit in industry, and at the CDC. New sciences based on new microarray technologies, which she was focusing on, but she would use this map to show the complex situation that the environmental sciences themselves faced in generating their own disciplines as they were developing. The third kind of map is the last of my maps, is a positional map. They map positions in particular discourses in the situation under study, organized around particular issues in the discourse, laying out positions taken and not taken along 2 axes. The analyst has to figure out what the axes are, which are issues that are contested, often in arenas. So the social worlds arenas maps, which are done not somewhat mid-project initially, often generate the axes useful in doing the positional maps that are done late in the trajectory of the research project. One of my goals in these maps was making silences speak by showing positions not taken in the discourse in a particular area. And silence has been something that both Kathy and I have been interested in for a long time. one of the fun things I found in the last couple of weeks doing workshops on situational analysis in Vienna and here, our house of much more sophisticated people have been at doing the positional maps, the discursive maps, which isn't true in the United States, where I developed the social worlds arenas maps and the positional maps explicitly because most qualitative research in North America is interview-based and ignores both the social and discourses. In some, then, situational maps center on elucidating key elements, discourses, structures, and conditions of possibility that characterize a situation of inquiry. They can deeply situate research individually, collectively, organizationally, institutionally, temporally, geographically, materially, discursively, culturally, symbolically, visually, and historically. The importance of Strauss's social worlds arenas theory, Foucault's emphasis on discourse and going beyond the knowing subject, and the non-human are all important. In conclusion, I briefly compare more traditional forms of GT with constructionist GT and situational analysis. And I'll let you read through that. And all of those differences are important to situational analysis and to constructivist grounded theory. So, in creating situational analysis, I was very reassured by the epigraph from John Dewey that is on the dedication page of Strauss and Corbin's Basics books. Dewey wrote in 1934, "If the artist does not perfect new vision in his process of doing, he acts mechanically and repeats some old model fixed like a blueprint in his mind." So that allowed me the space to create this extension. And I hope situational maps make useful contributions to the grounded theory banquet. Please feel free to sample. And thank you again for coming.
So thank you, Adele. And we have some minutes left for discussion. So please feel free to ask questions, whatever you like.
Thanks. I was impressed with your several maps, but one of the things that comes into mind that you're going to drown because you want to include everything. Mm. Is that correct? Am I seeing this correct? Or?
Well, I think the world is a complex place, and that we need to keep moving. And even if you analyze a huge diversity of materials in your analytic work, it does not mean that all of that gets included in your final publications. Nor do most of these maps get explicitly included. The social worlds arenas maps, and then people often develop their own project maps based on, so often on social worlds arenas, but to feature elements of particular projects. So, but by analyzing these different kinds of materials, which one can do separately or together, I think it's a better take on the complexities of the worlds we live in and what we want to understand. And we have to make the final decisions. That's what I meant. We have to decide at the end of the analytic day what we're going to go forward with in terms of writing it up, and the article or the book, etc. So that burden is always with us. So.
Yes, no, of course, but okay, thanks.
Yeah.
thank you, Ms. Clarke, for your very enlightening presentation. I have basically two questions. Where did you derive your categories from? Like when you were sitting at the Lawrence River, you know, is there some research that you base it on? And the second question was, could you elaborate a bit more on the relation to postmodernism? Because actually, to my understanding of a postmodernist and deconstructivist view of things is that we just can't give up on representing the complexity at all. So we are very situational, and therefore we just give up on representing the complexity of things. Is that how you deal with it? No. Okay.
No,
So
no,
I'd be happy to hear some more. Thanks.
I'm assuming you meant the kinds of categories in the situational maps, the different, yeah. Some of that was through Strauss's work, and some of it was through my own research in science and technology studies, and you know, all different kinds of things. The kinds of that both non-human things mattered terrifically, and it's very much at the heart of science and technology studies work, which I've done also for 20 years. And Strauss was into spatial and temporal and symbolic, and they come out of symbolic interactionism and also you know, sort of research experience, and my sitting with students doing research for a long, long time. So, but let me emphasize again that it's not expected that each of those would be in every project. It's trying to give, you know, and I just gave mostly abstract examples here, to give an idea of what might be there so that people can, you know, be inspired to map what is there in their situations. So that's the categories question. There are many forms of postmodernism and post-structuralism, and the situationism that I tend to and emphasize is one version, and it's very much inspired by Foucault. And doesn't move away from complexity, but seizes it and tries to figure out how better to represent it, rather than to evade it or avoid it. Which, I mean, you know, I come from American social science, which I think has been largely in love with simplification since World War II. So I'm struggling against that, and it's an uphill battle, and you know, struggling in qualitative inquiry where I've dwelled for 30 years, or more actually, from other work. In the States, there's very little attention to the social. It's mostly micro research. You wouldn't know from reading it where it had happened or when it had happened. It ignores geography, geopolitical issues, history, you know, and also very hardly anything. Anybody has worked on discourses, and I know that's totally different here. So that, you know, but those are the struggles and the situation in which I've created this method, trying to push those toward the center of inquiry for qualitative researchers.
Yes, I yet have another question, which is maybe doubling what you had said, and if so, I'm sorry. Going back to my former question about kind of like including everything. Now, with what you had said, I'm wondering now, could I be seeing your the first map you showed, the messy one, and then the one behind that, having ordered that messy one in all the possible things that might be going on, more as some kind of a tool or some kind of an instrument that could help you in kind of deciding while you're underway on the route you're going to take. By mapping it as such, it would become then more of a design tool. By mapping it, laying it out to yourself while you're doing it, you could then design while you're underway and keeping everything in the map just to remind yourself, as you were talking about.
Exactly.
So that would be your purpose for that map.
Here's an exemplar map of yes, it is very much a tool, and I mean, I think all the maps are tools, analytic tools, and just trying to to create tools that enhance our addressing of the complexity. And then, and I should have included this slide, but you can see here, you can draw lines. This is using this messy map for relational analyses, and so you can think about what is the relationship between each of these two entities on the map, each of the two elements, and as a way to think through the elements in your situation systematically. Because I too, like the Strauss and Corbin, I too very much believe in systematic analysis of data. I think we have tremendous richness in data that goes unmined, that as analysts we tend to sort of take the cream off the top, take the caps off the waves of what we have rather than push and delve more deeply in exactly analytic tools. So.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I think I learned very lot from it. But I have a question about the last slide that you had. If I got it right, you were talking about positivist grounded theory.
This?
In the first column. And I thought maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this wording and in which way you think that, which positions you are referring to exactly, and what you mean by the positivist.
Many others have critiqued traditional grounded theory, the Glaser, Strauss version, and sometimes subsequent versions by them, as tending toward more positivist orientations in their books. So it's that, and these issues on the left side are issues that were at the heart of their arguments. Assuming that as researchers should be a tabula rasa, that we could go into a situation, into a research project, not knowing about it, which there was less research in 1967, but there was some. And usually, today it's not possible. You can't do a master's or a PhD thesis without an ambitious literature review, nor can you do a grant application. So, and you need to do all of that before you design you figure out some kind of project design. And nothing solves the problem of qualitative researchers and grants, which is that grants expect you to tell them what you're going to find before you know it. So nothing solves that. We still will struggle with that, but we aren't tabula rasa, and we can draw on our substantive and theoretical knowledge, but the maps are maps of empirical materials, okay? But it doesn't mean we're naive when we come in to it. A lot of early grounded theory formulations used more master narrative formulations as ways of writing, rather than noting the partialities of research, noting the limits of what a particular project can do. And they relied mostly on knowing subjects via interviews and ethnography. And I'm saying, let's look at the array of materials. And Atkinson and Coffey talk about many of the things we're studying are self-documenting, especially institutions, millions of documents that sit there and are important, and we should be noticing them and seeing how they matter. I think the era of belief, this is the post-structural, the universal truths and generalizations don't hold much water anymore. And for me, it was very important, the range of variation or complexity, even the word range of variation is awfully positivist, but in the original works, Glaser and Strauss talked about differences or outliers as negative cases. Negative to what? Right? We are trying to understand the whole thing. So that's my commitment in terms of that. Does that help? Great.
So thank you very much. If you subscribe to postmodernism as a theoretical foundation for your approach, then I think you share the problems which in my understanding, which postmodernism has. One is how we can conceptualize what goes beyond situation. What I mean, we are affected, or our lives are affected, even that we don't know who is responsible or what structures or forces and so on. So they are not present in the situation, which is the unit of your analysis, if I understood you correctly. So what conceptual means do we need, or how can we develop conceptual means which would allow us to reach those beyond situational structures, actors, and forces? I think we need a concept of society as a totality, though I'm aware how postmodernists, how strong resistance postmodernists have against any universal claims, any claims to appeal to consent and so on. But I don't think that we can reach all the levels which are constitutive to human experience and human life without such concepts. So I would be interested to know what is your opinion on that problems I see with postmodernist positions. Thank you.
Challenging question, of course. Yeah. None of the maps that I recommend address directly what we think of as macro issues in sociology: urbanization, globalization, et cetera, et cetera. And I think they're more like scientification, racial formations, gender formations, all these kinds of things. But I think that these are processes, these are broad, long-term historical processes, and that they are manifest in situations. And that it is our task in creating all of the maps to consider how these may be manifest in our situations. I don't think they're out there. I think they're in here. I think we can understand globalization by looking at the tags on our clothing. In part, a little piece of it. But there are many ways in which I don't think, I use micro, meso, macro terminology, even though many postmodernists, post-structuralists wouldn't. I teach many students who lack an analysis of the social. They don't have a background in social science. So I'm trying to. So I think those terms are useful, but I also think that all of those levels are in this room with us at any moment. So it's how are they present? If you, as an analyst, think racial formations are important to a particular research project, then you should think about that. This is one of my critiques of Glaser and Strauss, they would say, especially around race and gender, but around other things too, that if it wasn't in the data, then you shouldn't analyze, that it wasn't there. But they never talked about who generated that data and what questions you asked and what you sought in generating the data that you would then analyze. So I talk a lot in the book, and I haven't talked about it today, but about that absence in their framing of grounded theory, that we are responsible for gathering the data as well. And that's why I say we need so many kinds of data to get at the range of issues that matter today. So.
Okay, es ist spät geworden. Danke noch einmal Frau Clarke Ihnen für die Diskussion.
Thank you.
Irgendwo sollte eine Abschlussfolie des Berliner Methodentreffens sein. Ich finde sie nicht. Wir sind aber am Ende des Berliner Methodentreffens und es freut mich, dass wir 2 wunderbare Tage hatten. And thank you, Adele, for being here. Thank you for closing our 2 days. It was I enjoy to listen to your lecture. I enjoy talking with you yesterday evening. Vielen Dank auch an die Kollegen aus Wien, die das mit ermöglicht haben, und Reiner Keller, der das vorgeschlagen hat. Es ist damit nicht nur die 3, und Sie müssen jetzt keine Angst haben, dass ich jeden Einzelnen aufzähle. Es ist dank dessen jetzt ein sehr schöner Abschluss von 2 Tagen geworden. Es ist nicht das verflixte 7. Jahr, das ich irgendwie möglicherweise gedacht hätte, dass wir das haben können, eben dank der Mitwirkung der ganz, ganz vielen Menschen hier, die das gemacht haben. Und damit ist es eine sehr runde Veranstaltung geworden. In der Regel haben wir das Berliner Methodentreffen immer damit ausklingen lassen, dass wir uns zusammengesetzt haben in einem Saal. Wir haben uns ausgetauscht, nochmal so reflektiert, Revue passieren lassen, wie es gewesen ist. Diesmal haben wir vorgezogen, die Closing Lecture zu haben. Wir werden jetzt also nicht diesen Austausch hier machen, vielleicht noch das eine oder andere Wort draußen im Foyer. Sie werden per Online-Fragebogen eingeladen zur Evaluation. Der ist bereits vor 4 Stunden an Sie verschickt worden, die Einladung. Wenn Sie nach Hause kommen, können Sie sich mit frischen Eindrücken hinsetzen und uns eine Rückmeldung geben, wenn Sie das wollen. Als wir letztes Jahr hier waren, wusste ich nicht, dass wir Frau Froschauer und Herrn Lueger hier haben werden. Ich wusste nicht mal, dass wir Adele Clarke hier haben werden. Es ist klar, dass wir dann das Berliner Methodentreffen auch wieder weitermachen. Wenn Sie jetzt uns fragen würden, was wir denn vorhaben, wir wissen das nicht. Wir wissen, dass es das geben wird. Wir wissen, dass das ungefähr Mitte Juli sein wird. Nächstes Jahr ist irgendwann eine Fußball-Europameisterschaft. Wir werden also die Woche nach dem Finale erst einladen, weil wir Sie nicht verärgern möchten, dass Sie sich nicht entscheiden müssen zwischen dem Berliner Methodentreffen und der Fußball-Europaweltmeisterschaft. Die Entscheidung wäre klar, wo Sie hingehen würden, das wissen wir. Wir wissen das nicht. Wir werden irgendwie so um Jahreswechsel herum das Programm einigermaßen zusammen haben. Ab Januar, Februar, März dann wieder einladen. Und ich finde es eine enorme Leistung, dass wir irgendwie im Frühjahr des Jahres wissen, wie das Methodentreffen aussieht und dann Mitte im Juli hier zu sein mit 450 Personen insgesamt. Und finde wirklich, dass wir alle, und wir alle meine ich jetzt alle Mitwirkenden, aktiv Mitwirkende, eine enorme Leistung machen, dass die Personen im Hintergrund, insbesondere Rubina Fock und Sebastian Ruppel, enormes machen, dass wir innerhalb von 3 Monaten diese Veranstaltung so umsetzen. Und deshalb ist es natürlich völlig absurd, dass ich hier alleine stehe. Da gehören ganz viele gerade daher, wie wir das sonst auch in dem großen Saal gemacht haben, dass wir da zu 5 oder zu 6 sitzen. Katja Moog sitzt da oben auf der Ecke, die dazugehört und irgendwie hier vorne für Sie jetzt sinnbildlich mitsteht. Und den Dank möchte ich vor allen Dingen auch an Sie als Teilnehmende richten. Ich finde, es ist jedes Mal wieder aufs Neue ein großes Vergnügen, mit Ihnen die Methodentage zu haben, weil Sie unsere Anmeldeprozedere irgendwie ganz gut ertragen, dass Sie die 600, die jetzt nicht kommen konnten, uns viel Spaß wünschen und sich einfach wünschen, dass Sie nächstes Jahr dabei sind und Sie 400, die hier da waren, also jetzt nicht mehr ganz, wirklich auch diesen Organisationsablauf mitmachen. Es ist für alle Beteiligten eine enorme Freude, das zu machen, weil sonst erklärt sich das nicht A, der Erfolg, und B, dass wir das immer wieder aufs Neue machen, weil das ja für alle ungeheuer viel Arbeit ist. In diesem Sinne bedanke ich mich im Namen der gesamten Veranstaltenden, der Förderer des Berliner Methodentreffens, bedanke mich für Ihre Teilnahme und wünsche Ihnen einen schönen Nachhauseweg, und den einen oder die andere werden wir dann in einem Jahr wiedersehen, sofern es das Anmeldeverfahren will. In diesem Sinne einen schönen Abend und machen Sie es gut.